I stood in the marble lobby of Pinnacle Construction, my cardboard box trembling in my hands as security escorted me past shocked coworkers. 24 hours earlier, I was their top project coordinator with 5 years of perfect reviews. Now, Vice President Bradley Thornton was screaming into his phone, while lawyers in expensive suits rushed past me, their faces pale with panic. The receptionist whispered something about federal investigators. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that made my blood run cold. 3 days earlier, I was exactly where I thought I belonged. The Harbor View residential project spread across my dual monitors like a digital empire I had built brick by brick. 27 buildings, 450 units of affordable housing, and a budget of $68 million. After 5 years of climbing the ladder at Pinnacle Construction, this was my masterpiece. The office hummed with its usual evening energy. Most of the administrative staff had gone home, but us project coordinators always stayed late. The construction industry never slept, and neither did we. I was reviewing the latest soil report when Madison bounded through the glass doors, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and that infectious smile lighting up her face. "Tracy, this place is incredible," my 19-year-old sister said, spinning around to take in the sleek reception area with its polished granite floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. "Welcome to my second home." I laughed, saving my work and standing to give her a hug. "You sure you want to see where your big sister spends 60 hours a week?" Madison had just finished her freshman year at Portland State and was starting a summer internship at a nonprofit downtown. She wanted to see my office before beginning what she called her real-world adventure. Our parents lived 3 hours away in Eugene, so Madison often crashed at my apartment when she had early morning commitments in the city. "Show me everything," she demanded, and I could not resist her enthusiasm. I led her through the maze of cubicles where our estimators and schedulers worked their magic with spreadsheets and blueprints. We passed the conference rooms where I had presented dozens of project proposals, each one a stepping stone toward the corner office I dreamed of earning. Madison asked smart questions about building codes and permit processes, her business major giving her a framework to understand the complexity of what we did. We reached the executive floor just as Derek Thornton stepped out of the elevator. At 25, the vice president's son carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never been told no. His expensive suit could not hide his soft physique or the entitled smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face. Derek technically worked as a business development associate, though everyone knew his real job description was being Bradley Thornton's son. Well, what do we have here?" Derek's eyes locked onto Madison with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Tracy, you did not tell me you had such a gorgeous sister." Madison shifted uncomfortably beside me instinctively, stepping closer to my protective presence. "Nice to meet you," she said politely, extending her hand for a professional handshake. Derek grabbed her hand with both of his, holding it far longer than appropriate, while his gaze traveled up and down her body. "The pleasure is definitely all mine. You know I could show you around the really exclusive parts of this building, places most people never get to see." "That's very kind," Madison replied, trying to extract her hand from his grip. "But Tracy's already giving me the complete tour." "Oh, but I could give you a much more personal experience," Derek continued, finally releasing her hand, only to place his palm on her forearm. "Maybe over dinner sometime. I know all the best places in the city." The way he emphasized personal made my stomach turn. Madison glanced at me with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable but too polite to be outright rude to someone who was obviously important at my company. "Derek," I interrupted, my voice carefully, professional, despite the anger building in my chest. "Madison is here for a quick family visit. We should probably let you get back to your evening." His expression hardened slightly, the rejection clearly not sitting well with him. "Actually, Tracy, I think Madison is old enough to speak for herself." "Aren't you, sweetheart?" The condescending tone in his voice when he called her sweetheart crossed a line I would not tolerate. "She's 19 and in college," I said firmly, "and she's my sister, so I would appreciate if you gave her some space." Derek's face flushed red, his jaw clenching as he processed being challenged in his own family's domain. "Wow, Tracy, I was just being friendly. You know networking is a big part of business development. Maybe you should worry less about babying your sister and more about your own career trajectory here." The threat in his voice was barely veiled. He straightened his tie and smoothed his hair, trying to regain his composure, while Madison stood frozen between us. "I hope you reconsider my offer, Madison. I could really help someone like you get ahead in this city." Without waiting for a response, he strode toward his father's corner office, leaving us standing in the hallway. Madison exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging with relief. "What a creep," she whispered once we were sure he was out of earshot. "I'm so sorry about that," I said, my protective instincts still on high alert. "Derek thinks he owns the place because his daddy's the VP. Most of us just try to avoid him." We finished the tour quickly after that, but the encounter had soured the mood. I showed Madison my cubicle with its collection of project photos and architectural drawings, tried to recapture the excitement she had felt earlier. But I could tell her mind was still processing Derek's behavior. As we gathered our things to leave, Madison turned to me with a troubled expression. "Tracy, that guy Derek followed me to the parking garage while you were in the bathroom. He cornered me next to your car and started saying really explicit things about what he wanted to do to me. He got really close, like he was going to kiss me, or worse." I managed to get away when someone else walked by, but it was terrifying. My blood turned to ice. "Madison, why did not you tell me immediately? I did not want to cause problems for you at work," she said quietly. But the way he looked at me, the things he said, I felt like prey. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Madison slept soundly in my guest room. Derek's behavior was not just inappropriate, it was predatory. And if he was willing to corner my sister in a parking garage after knowing her for 20 minutes, what was he doing to other women? I spent hours researching the company's harassment policies, employee protection protocols, and Derek's history at Pinnacle Construction. What I found made my stomach turn. 3 female employees had left the company abruptly in the past 2 years, all of them young women in entry-level positions. The exit interviews were sealed, and their LinkedIn profiles showed gaps in employment that did not make sense for ambitious professionals. By morning, I had made my decision. I would not let Derek's behavior slide, even if it meant risking everything I had worked for. But as I prepared for another day at the office, I had no idea how naive that decision would prove to be. My phone buzzed with a meeting request from Bradley Thornton himself. Subject line, "Urgent discussion regarding professional conduct." My hands shook as I accepted the meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. the following morning. The trap had already been set, and I was walking straight into it. Bradley Thornton's corner office felt like a throne room designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Portland skyline, while the massive mahogany desk dominated the space like an altar of corporate power. Family photos lined the credenza behind him. Derek's graduation picture from Stanford prominently displayed among images of yacht trips and ski vacations. I sat in the uncomfortable leather chair across from him, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Thornton was a man who wore authority like an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled and his steel gray eyes calculating every word before it left his mouth. At 58, he had built Pinnacle Construction into a regional powerhouse through what he called decisive leadership, and what others whispered was ruthless intimidation. "Tracy, I appreciate you coming in early for this conversation," he began, his voice carrying the false warmth of a politician. "I understand there was an incident involving my son Derek yesterday evening." I chose my words carefully, knowing this conversation would determine everything that came next. "Yes, sir. Derek made some inappropriate comments to my sister Madison and put his hands on her without permission. I asked him to give her space, which he did not appreciate." Thornton's expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed against the desktop in a rhythm that suggested barely contained irritation. That's interesting because Derek's version of events is quite different. He tells me he was simply being friendly to a visitor offering to help her network professionally when you became hostile and accusatory without any provocation. Sir, with all due respect, Derek followed my sister to the parking garage and made explicit sexual comments while cornering her alone. That goes far beyond professional networking. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thornton leaned back in his chair, studying me with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. Tracy, you're making very serious allegations against my son. Allegations that could damage his reputation and standing in this company. Do you have any witnesses to support these claims? Madison will confirm everything I've told you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Ah, yes, your teenage sister, a biased witness with every reason to support your version of events. Thornton stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. Let me share what I think really happened yesterday. He turned to face me, his expression hardening into something that made my spine straighten involuntarily. I think you saw an opportunity to create drama where none existed. I think you were jealous that Derek showed interest in your sister instead of you. I think you viciously attacked the character of an innocent man to cover up your own unprofessional behavior. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Mr. Thornton, that is absolutely not what happened. Derek's behavior was predatory and inappropriate. Predatory. Thornton's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. You're accusing my son of being a sexual predator because he tried to be friendly to a young woman. Do you understand how dangerous and defamatory that kind of language is? I realized this was not a fact-finding mission. This was a character assassination designed to discredit me before I could cause problems for Derek or the company. I understand you want to protect your son, but multiple people witnessed his behavior yesterday. Multiple people witnessed you attacking Derek unprovoked, Thornton countered. Multiple people saw you create a hostile work environment based on fabricated claims. Multiple people are now questioning your judgment and professionalism. He returned to his desk and opened a manila folder, sliding a sheet of paper across the surface toward me. This is why I called you in here today, Tracy. You have damaged this company's reputation and created a liability situation that could have serious consequences. I glanced at the document without picking it up. It appeared to be some kind of formal complaint form partially filled out with Derek's name in the complainant section. You have two options, Thornton continued, his voice taking on the tone of a judge delivering a sentence. Option 1, you send a company-wide email today acknowledging that your accusations against Derek were false and unprofessional. You publicly apologize for your behavior and commit to maintaining appropriate workplace conduct going forward. My mouth went dry. And option 2. Option 2 is immediate termination for creating a hostile work environment, making false accusations against a fellow employee, and conduct detrimental to company operations, with a reference that reflects your poor judgment and unprofessional behavior. The ultimatum hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. I understood now why those other women had left so suddenly. This was Thornton's system for protecting his son and maintaining control. You want me to lie in writing to the entire company? I said slowly. I want you to take responsibility for your actions and apologize for the harm you've caused, Thornton replied smoothly. Derek is willing to be gracious about this incident if you show appropriate remorse. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternal tone that felt more threatening than comforting. Tracy, you're a talented coordinator with a bright future in this industry. Don't throw that away over a misunderstanding. I have relationships with every major construction firm in the Pacific Northwest. One phone call from me could ensure you never work in this field again. The threat was clear and credible. Thornton's network extended throughout the industry, and his reputation for destroying people who crossed him was well established. I thought about my student loan payments, my mortgage, the medical bills I helped my mother cover since her cancer diagnosis. How long do I have to decide? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The apology email needs to be sent by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning," Thornton said, glancing at his Rolex. "That gives you 18 hours to consider your options and make the mature choice." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. "I hope you'll do the right thing, Tracy, for your sake and for Derek's. Some reputations can recover from false accusations, others cannot." As I walked back to my cubicle on unsteady legs, I felt the eyes of my co-workers tracking my movement. Word of the early morning meeting with the VP had already spread through the office gossip network. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few reflected the cold calculation of people distancing themselves from potential trouble. I slumped into my desk chair and stared at the Harbor View project files that had represented my greatest professional achievement just 24 hours earlier. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, hung in the balance of a decision that felt like choosing between my integrity and my survival. My computer chimed with a new email from Derek himself. Subject line: "Looking forward to working together." The message contained a single line: "I hope we can put yesterday's misunderstanding behind us and move forward professionally." It was a masterful piece of manipulation, creating a paper trail that suggested our conflict was minor and mutual. If I sent the apology email, this message would serve as evidence that we had resolved our differences amicably. If I refused, it would make my hostility appear even more unreasonable. I closed my laptop and gathered my things, unable to concentrate on work, while my entire future hung in the balance. As I headed for the elevator, I caught sight of Derek through his father's office window. He was laughing at something on his phone, completely relaxed and confident. That image burned into my memory as the elevator doors closed. Derek Thornton had never faced consequences for his actions, never been told he could not have whatever he wanted. Tomorrow morning, I would have to decide whether that pattern would continue. But first, I had 18 hours to figure out if there was a third option that Thornton had not considered. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling while Madison breathed peacefully in the room next door, unaware that her safety had ignited a war that could destroy everything I had built. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek's predatory smile and heard Thornton's threats echoing through my mind. At 3 a.m., I gave up on rest and moved to my kitchen table with my laptop and a pot of coffee. If Thornton thought he could intimidate me into silence, he had seriously underestimated who he was dealing with. I might be just a project coordinator, but I knew how to research, how to gather data, and how to build a case. I started with Pinnacle Construction's employee handbook, searching for every policy related to harassment, discrimination, and workplace conduct. The language was carefully crafted to protect the company rather than employees, but there were still protections that Thornton seemed to be ignoring. More importantly, the handbook referenced federal regulations and state laws that could not be overridden by corporate intimidation. Next, I turned to LinkedIn, searching for former Pinnacle employees who had left under suspicious circumstances. The pattern became clear quickly. 3 women in the past 18 months, Sarah Chen from marketing, Jennifer Walsh from human resources, and Amanda Stewart from accounting. All of them had been rising stars who left abruptly without securing new positions first. Sarah's profile showed an 8-month gap between leaving Pinnacle and starting her current role at a nonprofit organization. That kind of employment gap was career suicide in our industry unless something serious had forced her departure. I crafted a careful message to Sarah, identifying myself as a current Pinnacle employee who had experienced concerning behavior and was seeking guidance. I kept it vague but professional, hoping she would be willing to share her experience. Her response came within 2 hours despite the early morning timestamp. "Can you talk by phone? This is not something I can discuss in writing." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the Pearl District at 7 a.m. neutral territory, where we could speak freely without worrying about corporate surveillance. Sarah arrived looking tired but determined, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and her business casual attire suggesting she was heading to work afterward. "You mentioned Derek Thornton in your message," she said without preamble, as we settled into a corner booth with our drinks. "What did he do to you?" I explained Madison's encounter and the ultimatum Thornton had delivered. Sarah listened with the grim expression of someone hearing a familiar story. "He cornered me in the supply closet on my floor," she said quietly, blocked the door with his body, and put his hands all over me while making graphic comments about what he wanted to do. When I threatened to scream, he laughed and said no one would believe me over a Thornton. My coffee turned cold as she continued. I reported it to HR the next day. Director Peterson said he would investigate thoroughly and ensure appropriate action was taken. Instead, I was called into a meeting with Peterson and two lawyers I had never seen before. What kind of meeting? They offered me a settlement package worth 6 months of salary, plus benefits, contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement and resigning immediately. They said if I refused, they would find reasons to terminate me for poor performance and make sure I never worked in Portland again. The systematic nature of their operation became clear. This was not about protecting Derek from false accusations. This was about silencing victims of actual assault. "Sarah, did you keep any documentation from that meeting?" She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. I recorded the entire conversation. Peterson explicitly stated that the company had too much invested in Derek's future to let some disgruntled employee derail his career. He said they had handled similar situations before and knew how to protect their interests. The recording was devastating. Peterson's voice was clear and unmistakable as he outlined the company's strategy for buying silence and threatening consequences for non-compliance. But more importantly, he referenced similar situations, confirming this was an established pattern. "Sarah, would you be willing to share this recording with authorities if it came to that?" "I have been waiting for someone with enough courage to take them on," she said firmly. "The NDA I signed is void if they were covering up criminal activity." I consulted with a lawyer about that. She provided contact information for Jennifer and Amanda, both of whom had similar experiences and similar recordings. The scope of Pinnacle's cover-up operation was staggering. They had created a system for protecting Derek that involved witness intimidation, illegal settlements, and systematic destruction of victims' careers. But as I drove back to my apartment, my phone buzzing with supportive messages from the other women, I realized there was an even bigger problem lurking beneath Derek's harassment campaign. My work on the Harborview project had given me access to financial records and contract details that most employees never saw. As I reviewed those documents with fresh eyes, discrepancies jumped out that I had previously attributed to normal administrative complexity. Billing irregularities in the federal subsidy allocations, vendor payments that did not match submitted invoices, material costs that seemed inflated compared to industry standards. Harborview was not just my greatest professional achievement. It was a federally funded project, and someone was manipulating the numbers. I spent the rest of the morning cross-referencing expenses with actual delivery records, comparing vendor quotes with final payments, and tracking the flow of federal housing subsidies through Pinnacle's accounting system. What I found made my hands shake. Someone was systematically inflating costs and skimming the difference. Federal housing money was being diverted into accounts that had no legitimate business purpose. The pattern suggested fraud on a massive scale, potentially involving millions of dollars in taxpayer funds. Derek's harassment was not an isolated problem. It was a symptom of a company culture that believed it was above the law. And federal fraud carried consequences that no amount of family influence could overcome. I researched whistleblower protections for federal contract, fraud employment, discrimination remedies, and criminal penalties for witness intimidation. The pieces of a strategy began forming in my mind, one that would give me leverage Thornton could not counter with corporate politics or industry connections. By the time Madison woke up, I had compiled enough evidence to bury Pinnacle Construction under federal investigations that could last for years. The question was no longer whether I could survive challenging Derek and his father. The question was whether I had the courage to bring down the entire corrupt system they had built. My phone buzzed with a reminder. The apology email was due in 4 hours. Thornton was probably sitting in his office right now, confident that his intimidation tactics had worked once again. He was about to learn that some people fight back. Attorney Jessica Rodriguez's downtown office occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming tower that commanded views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood's snow-capped peaks. At 42, Rodriguez had built her reputation defending whistleblowers and employment discrimination victims against Oregon's most powerful corporations. Her walls displayed framed articles from legal journals and commendation letters from federal agencies testament to her success at taking down companies that thought they were untouchable. Ms. Kennedy, what you've described constitutes a clear pattern of criminal behavior, Rodriguez said, after reviewing the evidence I had compiled. The harassment allegations alone would be sufficient for federal charges under Title VII, but the contract fraud elevates this to a completely different level. She spread the Harborview financial documents across her conference table, her experienced eye quickly identifying the discrepancies I had discovered. Federal housing subsidies fall under HUD oversight and involve criminal penalties that can include decades in federal prison. If Pinnacle has been systematically defrauding these programs, your harassment case becomes evidence in a major federal investigation. What does that mean for my situation? I asked, my voice steadier now that I had professional guidance. It means you have protection under federal whistleblower statutes that supersede any corporate retaliation. If they fire you for reporting federal crimes, that itself becomes a federal offense. The Department of Justice takes these cases very seriously, especially when they involve public corruption. Rodriguez explained the process for filing complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Each agency would launch its own investigation, creating multiple layers of federal protection. The key is documentation, she continued. Every conversation, every threat, every piece of evidence needs to be preserved according to federal standards. Are you prepared for what this will entail? I thought about Derek's predatory behavior, Thornton's intimidation tactics, and the other women who had been silenced through fear and manipulation. Whatever it takes to stop them, then we need to move quickly. Your deadline for the apology email is in 3 hours, which gives us a narrow window to establish your protected status before any retaliation occurs. We spent the next 90 minutes preparing federal complaint forms, organizing evidence according to legal standards, and developing a strategy for maximum impact. Rodriguez's assistant helped scan documents and prepare digital files for immediate transmission to federal authorities. The Harborview fraud evidence was particularly damning. Cross-referencing actual construction costs with reported expenses revealed a pattern of systematic inflation designed to maximize federal subsidy payments. Vendor invoices had been altered, material costs inflated, and labor hours fabricated to justify payments that far exceeded legitimate project costs. This appears to be organized criminal activity, Rodriguez observed. The level of coordination required suggests involvement at the highest levels of management. Your VP Thornton would almost certainly be aware of this scheme. That realization hit me like cold water. Thornton's aggressive protection of Derek was not just about family loyalty. If federal investigators started examining Pinnacle's operations, they would discover the fraud scheme that had probably financed the company's recent expansion and Thornton's lavish lifestyle. Ms. Kennedy, I need you to understand something important, Rodriguez said, as we prepared to file the complaints. Once we trigger federal investigations, there's no going back. Pinnacle will deploy every resource they have to discredit you, intimidate you, and destroy your credibility. They'll hire private investigators, challenge your character, and try to make your life miserable. They're already doing that, I pointed out. At least this way, they'll have federal agents watching their every move. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Fair enough. Let's file these complaints and see how they respond when they realize you're under federal protection. The complaint forms went out electronically at 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before my apology deadline. Copies went to the FBI, the Department of Justice HUD's Office of Inspector General, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Each agency would receive detailed evidence packages, including the harassment recordings, financial fraud documentation, and witness statements from Derek's other victims. Now we wait, Rodriguez said, as confirmation receipts populated our email inboxes. Federal agencies move slowly, but when they move, they're thorough. Pinnacle Construction is about to become the subject of multiple federal investigations. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Smart move. You're not alone in this fight. I showed it to Rodriguez, who frowned at the cryptic message. That's either very good news or very bad news, she said. Federal investigations sometimes prompt other victims to come forward, but they also attract attention from people trying to interfere with the process. We arranged for Rodriguez to be present during any future conversations with Pinnacle Management federal investigators or media representatives. She also provided me with contact information for FBI agent Patricia Chen, who specialized in construction industry fraud and would likely be assigned to coordinate the various investigations. Ms. Kennedy, are you prepared for what happens when you walk into that office this afternoon? Rodriguez asked as I prepared to leave. They're expecting an apology email that's never coming, I said. Instead, they're going to get federal search warrants and criminal investigations. Remember, you're now a protected federal witness. They cannot retaliate against you without committing additional federal crimes. If they try to fire you or intimidate you, document everything and contact me immediately. The drive back to Pinnacle Construction felt surreal. 3 days ago, I was a successful project coordinator focused on advancing my career and building my professional reputation. Now I was walking into a confrontation that could send my boss to federal prison and expose one of Oregon's largest construction companies as a criminal enterprise. But as I parked in the employee garage where Derek had cornered Madison, I felt something I had not experienced in years: complete moral clarity. Some fights are worth everything you have to lose, and some stands define who you are as a human being. Thornton was waiting for his apology email. Instead, he was about to discover that some people refuse to be intimidated, silenced, or bought off. The federal government was about to take a very close look at Pinnacle Construction, and Bradley Thornton's world was about to collapse around him. The Pinnacle Construction office buzzed with its normal midday energy as I walked through the lobby at exactly 9 a.m. Conversations paused as colleagues noticed my presence, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Word of my early morning meeting with Thornton had spread through the office gossip network, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I stopped at my desk to collect a few personal items, sliding family photos and my favorite coffee mug into a small box that I hoped would not be necessary. But deep down, I knew this confrontation would end only one way. Thornton had built his entire system around intimidation and control, and he would not tolerate public defiance. My computer showed 17 unread emails, including 3 marked urgent from Thornton's assistant requesting the apology draft for review. I deleted them all without opening them and began backing up my personal files to a secure cloud storage account. At 9:15, my desk phone rang with Thornton's direct line displaying on the caller ID. "Tracy, I'm not seeing your apology email in my inbox." Thornton's voice carried a dangerous edge beneath its superficial calm. "I trust there's simply been a technical delay." "No technical delay, Mr. Thornton," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heartbeat. "I've decided not to send an apology because I have nothing to apologize for. Derek's behavior toward my sister was inappropriate and predatory, and I will not lie to cover that up." The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Thornton responded. his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "I see. Please come to my office immediately." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to an execution chamber. Several coworkers watched me pass their faces, reflecting the tension that had settled over the office like a storm cloud. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. Thornton's office door stood open, but his expression left no doubt about the fury burning beneath his composed exterior. He gestured for me to sit without looking up from his computer screen, letting the silence build pressure in the room. "Tracy, I'm disappointed but not surprised," he finally said, his fingers moving across his keyboard with deliberate precision. "Your behavior over the past 24 hours has demonstrated a concerning lack of professional judgment and company loyalty. My behavior has demonstrated a commitment to protecting young women from sexual harassment," I replied. "Something this company should value rather than punish." Thornton's jaw tightened, but he continued typing. "I'm terminating your employment immediately for insubordination, creating a hostile work environment, and conduct detrimental to company operations. Security will escort you from the building within the next 5 minutes." The speed of his response confirmed this outcome had been predetermined. Thornton had never intended to give me a real choice. The apology demand was simply his preferred method of handling the situation without messy termination paperwork. "Mr. Thornton, before you finalize that decision, there's something you should know," I said, pulling out my phone to display Agent Chen's contact information. "I filed complaints about Derek's harassment and Pinnacle's retaliation with the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission this morning." Thornton's fingers froze above his keyboard, his face paling as the implications registered. "You did what?" "I'm now a protected federal whistleblower investigating harassment, fraud, and witness intimidation." I continued, watching his confidence crumble in real time. "Firing me for reporting federal crimes is itself a federal crime that carries serious prison time." "You're bluffing," Thornton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're trying to manipulate me with empty threats." I scrolled through my phone and displayed the confirmation emails from federal agencies. "Agent Patricia Chen from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division will be contacting you later today to discuss Pinnacle's financial practices on federal housing projects, particularly the Harbor View development, where I documented systematic fraud." The blood drained from Thornton's face as he realized the scope of what I had discovered. The harassment cover-up was just the beginning. Federal investigators would now examine every contract, every invoice, and every financial transaction that had funded his family's lifestyle. "You have no idea what you've done," he whispered, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. "You've declared war on this entire company and everyone who works here." "I've reported criminal activity to the appropriate authorities," I corrected. "What you do next will determine whether this gets worse or better for everyone involved." Thornton's phone buzzed with an incoming call. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Thornton, there are FBI agents in the lobby asking to speak with you about federal contracting practices. They have search warrants." The office fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and distant traffic sounds from the street below. Thornton stared at his phone as if it had transformed into a venomous snake. "Sir, should I send them up?" his assistant asked when no response came. "Tell them I'll be right down," Thornton replied, his voice hollow with defeat. He stood slowly, straightening his tie and smoothing his hair with hands that trembled slightly. The commanding presence he had projected just minutes earlier had evaporated, replaced by the desperate calculation of a man watching his empire collapse. "This conversation is not over, Tracy," he said as he moved toward the door. "You have no idea what kind of forces you've set in motion." "Yes, I do," I replied. "I've set justice in motion." Through Thornton's office windows, I watched FBI agents in dark suits speaking with the receptionist, while other agents began setting up equipment in the lobby. Employees throughout the building were gathering at windows and doorways, whispering among themselves as they witnessed federal law enforcement taking control of their workplace. My phone buzzed with the text from Madison. "Saw the news online. FBI raided your company. Are you okay?" The news had already broken on local media outlets. Pinnacle Construction was about to become the center of a federal investigation that would dominate headlines for months to come. And Bradley Thornton was about to discover that some people refuse to be intimidated into silence. Security guards appeared at Thornton's office door, but they seemed unsure of their authority with federal agents in the building. I gathered my personal items calmly and walked past them toward the elevator, no longer an employee, but now something much more powerful, a federal witness whose testimony could send corrupt executives to prison. The last thing I saw as the elevator doors closed was Derek Thornton rushing toward his father's office, his face twisted with panic as the consequences of his predatory behavior finally caught up with him. The next 48 hours transformed Pinnacle Construction from a regional powerhouse into the epicenter of a federal criminal investigation that dominated every news cycle in the Pacific Northwest. FBI agents with boxes of evidence streamed in and out of the building, while news vans lined the street and reporters ambushed employees leaving work. Agent Patricia Chen called me directly on Thursday evening, her voice professional, but warm, as she explained the rapid developments in the case. "Ms. Kennedy, your evidence package was extraordinary in its thoroughness. We're already seeing cooperation from other witnesses and victims who were afraid to come forward until now." The federal investigation had triggered an avalanche of revelations. Sarah Jennifer and Amanda had all agreed to testify in exchange for federal protection from retaliation. 3 additional women had contacted the FBI with similar stories of Derek's predatory behavior and the company's systematic cover-up efforts. "The harassment case alone would be significant," Agent Chen continued, "but the financial fraud you uncovered involves multiple federal agencies and potentially dozens of criminal charges. We're looking at conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and violation of federal contracting regulations." Derek had been arrested Wednesday morning at his downtown condominium, charged with multiple counts of sexual assault based on testimony from his victims. The arrest was captured by news cameras showing Derek in handcuffs as he was led to a federal courthouse where bail was set at $500,000. But Derek's legal troubles were minor compared to what his father was facing. The FBI had seized Pinnacle's computer servers, financial records, and communication systems. Forensic accountants were dissecting years of federal contracts, uncovering a fraud scheme that had potentially diverted millions of dollars in taxpayer money. "Mr. Thornton's attorney has indicated his client might be interested in cooperation," Agent Chen told me. "But honestly, we have enough evidence to proceed with or without his assistance. Your documentation of the Harbor View fraud was the breakthrough we needed." Thursday afternoon brought news that sent shockwaves through Portland's business community. Federal prosecutors had unsealed indictments charging Bradley Thornton with 18 counts of federal fraud, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. The indictments detailed a 7-year scheme to inflate costs on federal housing projects and skim the excess funds through shell companies and offshore accounts. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from reporters, job offers from competing construction firms, and support calls from former colleagues who were horrified by what they had learned about their workplace. Jessica Rodriguez handled most of the media inquiries, protecting my privacy while ensuring the story received appropriate coverage. "The federal prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow," Rodriguez informed me during one of our daily check-ins. "They're preparing for grand jury proceedings and need your testimony about both the harassment and the financial irregularities." The grand jury session took place in a secure federal courthouse downtown, where I spent 6 hours walking prosecutors through the evidence I had compiled. The financial fraud documentation was particularly damning, showing how Pinnacle had systematically inflated costs on every federal project over the past 7 years. "Ms. Kennedy, in your professional opinion, Was there any legitimate business justification for these cost overruns? Prosecutor Michael Davidson asked as we reviewed Harborview billing records. None whatsoever, I replied. The invoices had been altered after submission material costs inflated beyond market rates and labor hours fabricated to justify federal subsidy payments. This was deliberate theft of taxpayer money. Derek's assault trial began the following week, with 3 of his victims testifying about his predatory behavior and Pinnacle's efforts to silence them through illegal settlements and career threats. The evidence was overwhelming, including the recordings Sarah had made of her meeting with HR Director Peterson. The trial revealed additional details about the company's systematic protection of Derek, despite multiple complaints over several years. Peterson testified under immunity about meetings where Thornton explicitly ordered him to suppress harassment reports and offer settlements to avoid publicity. Mr. Thornton made it clear that Derek's career was more important than any individual employee complaint. Peterson admitted during cross-examination, "We were instructed to make problems disappear quietly, regardless of the merit of the allegations." Derek's defense attorney tried to portray him as a young man whose behavior had been misinterpreted, but the pattern of predatory conduct was impossible to deny. Multiple witnesses testified about inappropriate touching, explicit comments, and aggressive pursuit, despite clear rejection. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Derek was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and required to register as a sex offender upon release. His conviction sent a powerful message that family connections and corporate influence could not protect criminals from consequences. Bradley Thornton's fraud trial was scheduled for the following spring, but his legal team was already negotiating a plea agreement. Federal prosecutors had frozen Pinnacle's assets, seized the family's properties, and charged several other executives as co-conspirators in the fraud scheme. The company will likely be dissolved as part of the criminal forfeiture proceedings, Agent Chen explained during one of our final interviews. Federal agencies don't typically allow companies to continue operating after this level of criminal activity. The investigation also revealed that Pinnacle's corruption extended beyond financial fraud and harassment cover-ups. Federal contractors had been pressured to provide kickbacks in exchange for subcontracting opportunities. Environmental safety regulations had been ignored on multiple projects. Worker safety complaints had been suppressed to avoid federal oversight. My role as the whistleblower who exposed this criminal enterprise brought national attention to the case. I testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for federal contract whistleblowers and appeared on several news programs to discuss the investigation's broader implications. Ms. Kennedy, what would you tell other employees who witness criminal activity at their workplaces? A reporter asked during one television interview. I would tell them that staying silent enables harm to continue, I replied. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you think you want, but it gives you everything you actually need. The federal investigation had destroyed Pinnacle Construction, sent Derek and his father to prison, and exposed a criminal conspiracy that had operated for years. But more importantly, it had given voice to the women who had been silenced and sent a clear message that powerful people are not above the law. Justice was finally being served, and the women Derek had victimized were finally able to heal and move forward with their lives. The federal courthouse steps gleamed under late morning sunshine as I emerged from Bradley Thornton's sentencing, hearing the weight of 18 months lifting from my shoulders like morning fog dissipating over the Cascade Mountains. Thornton had received 14 years in federal prison for fraud conspiracy and witness intimidation, while his criminal empire lay in ruins around him. Jessica Rodriguez walked beside me, her satisfied smile reflecting the complete victory we had achieved. 14 years for financial fraud, 8 years for Derek's assault convictions, and asset forfeiture that will compensate every victim, she said. This case will be studied in law schools for decades as an example of how federal whistleblower protections actually work. The media attention had been overwhelming, but ultimately positive. National news outlets had covered the case as a David versus Goliath story, highlighting how one woman's courage had brought down a criminal conspiracy worth millions of dollars. My testimony before Congress had led to new legislation, strengthening protections for federal contract whistleblowers. But the personal transformation had been even more significant than the legal victories. 3 months after the investigation began, I accepted a position as compliance director for Pacific Northwest Construction, the region's most ethical and respected firm. My salary had doubled, but more importantly, I was now responsible for ensuring other companies operated within federal guidelines. Tracy, your integrity and attention to detail are exactly what this industry needs. My new boss had told me during the interview process, "We want someone who will never compromise on doing the right thing, regardless of the pressure or consequences." Madison had thrived during the chaos, using her experience as motivation to pursue a law degree with a focus on victims' rights advocacy. She volunteered with the foundation I had established, using part of my federal settlement money, helping other women report workplace harassment without fear of retaliation. "You saved my life that night," Madison told me during one of our weekly dinners, not just from Derek, but by showing me that women don't have to accept predatory behavior as normal. "You taught me that fighting back is possible and necessary." The foundation had already helped 17 women file successful harassment complaints and provided legal support for 12 federal whistleblower cases. Sarah, Jennifer, and Amanda served on the board of directors, using their experiences to guide other victims through the reporting process. Sarah had rebuilt her career as a marketing director for a nonprofit focused on construction worker safety. Jennifer returned to human resources with a specialty in ethical workplace policies. Amanda became a forensic accountant, helping federal investigators uncover corporate fraud. All 3 women had transformed their trauma into purpose-driven careers that protected others from similar experiences. The ripple effects of our case extended throughout the construction industry. Federal agencies had implemented new oversight procedures for housing projects, mandatory harassment training programs, and stronger protections for employees reporting criminal activity. Several other companies had voluntarily reformed their practices to avoid federal scrutiny. Derek's conviction had particular significance for other predators who thought family connections would protect them from consequences. During his trial, 2 additional women from his college years had come forward with assault allegations, leading to additional charges that ensured he would remain in prison for more than a decade. "The thing about enablers like Bradley Thornton," Agent Chen had explained during our final interview, "is that they create systems designed to protect criminals from accountability. When you destroy those systems, you expose not just individual crimes, but entire networks of corruption." Pinnacle Construction had been liquidated through federal asset forfeiture, with the proceeds used to compensate fraud victims and fund federal oversight programs. The company's former employees had mostly found positions with ethical firms that valued their technical skills while rejecting Pinnacle's corrupt culture. My personal life had stabilized into something I never could have imagined during those terrifying first days of the investigation. The stress and uncertainty had been replaced by a deep sense of purpose and belonging in work that made a genuine difference in people's lives. The Harbor View housing project had been completed under new management, with proper oversight and full federal subsidy funding, reaching its intended purpose. Low-income families were now living in quality, affordable housing that might never have been built if Pinnacle's fraud had continued unchecked. Standing on those courthouse steps, I reflected on the journey from that horrible night when Derek cornered Madison to this moment of complete vindication and justice. The cost had been enormous. Sleepless nights, constant stress threats from Thornton's associates, and the destruction of my original career plans. But the rewards had been immeasurable. I had discovered reserves of courage and integrity I never knew I possessed. I had built a career based on principles rather than politics. Most importantly, I had prevented other young women from experiencing the predatory behavior that Derek had inflicted on so many victims. The lesson was clear and powerful. Sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrificing everything you think you want in order to gain everything you actually need. Integrity is not a convenience to be abandoned when circumstances become difficult. It is the foundation upon which meaningful lives are built. Standing up to powerful people who abuse their authority is terrifying and costly, but it is also necessary for justice to exist in our society. Change requires individuals willing to accept personal risk for collective benefit. Progress demands that some people refuse to be intimidated into silence. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Patricia Williams, a former Pinnacle engineer who had accepted a position as the new head of the Federal Housing Oversight Commission. "Tracy, your courage changed this entire industry. Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like." As I walked away from the courthouse toward my new life, I thought about all the women who would never have to endure Derek's predatory behavior because we had found the strength to fight back. I thought about the federal housing funds that would now reach their intended recipients instead of financing criminal lifestyles. I thought about the culture of accountability we had created through our refusal to accept corruption as normal. The sun felt warm on my face as Madison joined me on the courthouse steps, her law school application submitted and her future bright with possibility. "Are you ready for lunch?" she asked, linking her arm through mine. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," I replied, and I meant every word. True power comes not from intimidating others, but from having the courage to stand up for what is right, even when you stand alone. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or money, but with truth, integrity, and the refusal to be silenced. The women of my generation inherited workplaces where harassment was tolerated and justice was optional, but we are leaving behind a world where accountability is expected and protection is real. That transformation required individual courage, collective action, and the absolute conviction that some principles are worth any personal cost. Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing required sacrificing something important to you? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your experience. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding courage in difficult circumstances. And share this with someone who might need to know that fighting back is possible. Thank you for listening to my journey. And I hope it inspires you to stand up for what you believe in no matter what forces try to silence your voice.